Today we're going to learn how to make our UI just a little bit nicer in PowerApps using some gradients and HTML styling tricks. Now, you know me, I'm not very good at pretty. I'm just so naturally handsome, but I'm not very good at making PowerApps pretty. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring my buddy on, Ryan, who's going to walk us through all this. So he's going to teach us how to do this stuff. And more importantly, he's not just going to dump code at you. He's going to help you understand what the code does and where to get it from some different resource sites. So that's enough of my blah, blah, blah. Let's jump into the video and see what Ryan's got to say.
In today's tutorial, we're going to dive into the HTML text control to enhance the styling of your user interfaces. This powerful tool expands your creative options in Canvas apps. It's going to help you highlight key information, improve clarity, and give your app a nice, clean, modern look. We're going to explore how to create badges, use gradients, apply blurs, and incorporate transparency to elevate your designs and make your apps more engaging and more intuitive. So let's get right into the app maker and get going. So we've got this cool weather dashboard, and we want to be able to click on this stormy Monday and get this pop-up of severe weather alerts. And we can see that the background of the pop-up doesn't completely cover the date cards underneath. It is mostly opaque, semi-transparent. It blurs what's underneath. It has this nice blur around the edge, a very subtle border. And then we've also got inside the pop-up these severe weather cards, or badges, if you will. Severe thunderstorm warning, flood watch. A second one over here. This one is an HTML text control. This one is just a label inside of a container. And we're going to talk about why we would want to use one over the other. So we've got that we're working with. And then the other thing is this cool gradient right here showing the temperature for June, where it goes from this blue all the way down to white. We're going to learn how you create something like that. So let's begin. We'll alt click on our little date here and look at what we've got going on. So we have a container into which I have placed an HTML text control. The HTML text control is set to be the width and the height of its parent container. So parent.height, parent.width. That way the HTML text control will fill that entire space. And then inside the HTML text control, we have got some HTML. So we'll go to our HTML text property. And what you'll see here is an HTML div element. And inside that div element, we are assigning some CSS style. Now, if all of this looks pretty crazy, don't worry, because I'm actually going to show you a really cool tip here in just a moment where you can get all of this code generated for you. But let's go look through it briefly so that we kind of understand what's going on. And I'll collapse this a little bit so that we can see these adjustments. The first is we set our background color. And you should know this function, RGBA. It's just like the RGBA function in PowerEffects, where we give it a red, a green, and a blue value, and then an alpha value between 0 and 1. So 0.6 represents 60% opacity. So if we set this at, say, 0.1, then you would see that, oh my goodness, you know, it's nearly entirely transparent. If we set it at 0.9, it's almost entirely opaque. So we go with a 0.6. That gives us this nice semi-transparent sort of look. The next piece that we're going to look at is this shadow that goes all around the edges. What's really cool about this is that this allows us to control a lot of properties about the shadow itself. Right now, we have just a nice kind of glow, if you will. But if we wanted instead to have a shadow that was offset, we could offset it. This represents our left to right offset. So you'll see that shadow moved over a bit. And then this is our up and down offset. So now then the shadow has the look as if like the sun was shining on it or light was shining on it at an angle. And you can create that more kind of traditional shadow. But in our case, we just want a nice glow. And so we're going to go put these box shadow values at 0 and 0. The next number is how much of a blur there is to the shadow. This is what we call the spread of the shadow. So it expands it out beyond the edges of your div element. We're going to set that back at 0. And then this is again RGBA, the color of your shadow and its transparency. The next piece that we're going to look at is this really cool feature that allows us to blur whatever is behind the div element, and that is backdrop blur. And so I've given it, I like about a 4-pixel blur most of the time. If you go much bigger, you can see it's so blurry you can almost not tell what it is. If you say a 1-pixel blur, then it's it overwhelms the subject matter at front. So we're going to put that as 4. Now then, you might ask, why in the world do we have a second line that's basically the same thing? This is actually some code that is helpful for cross-browser compatibility, particularly with Safari browsers, some older Chrome browsers. They really need to have this to be able to achieve the same thing. Now then, we have a margin, and we have to have this because if we have, we've got this lovely shadow, and we've noted that it's a 20-pixel shadow. And so we need at least 20 pixels on all sides of this div in order to accommodate the shadow. If we set it at 0, you'll see that it'll just move the whole div over to the side and up. By setting a single value, we're going to say 25, which gives the shadow plenty of wiggle room. This puts a 25 pixel margin around all sides of the div. And then the last thing is this very subtle little border. We'll crank this up here a bit so you can see what it is all about. Here would be like 10 pixels, and here it is at 90% opacity. Way too aggressive. We're just going to do a very subtle 1-pixel border at 30% opacity. It's just barely there. And then the last thing here is our border radius, and that is the rounded corner of the borders. It works just like the border radius does in our Canvas apps. We could make it, really big. We could make it very small, but that is your border radius. So that is the styling of this div. Now, a div inside this HTML text control needs a size. And since we've already set our HTML text control to dynamically derive its width and height from the container that it lives in, we basically just need to, in the HTML, assign the size of the div to be the same as itself inside the container. So we use our, we end our quotes with our double quote here, use our concatenation ampersand and say self.width -50. Now, why would we do -50? Well, this is the size of the div where you basically see the color. If we don't say -50, check this out. It expands out beyond, because remember, we have this margin of 25 pixels on left side and the right side. So whatever our total width is needs to be the size of the container that it's living in less the margins on both sides. So since we have a margin of 25 on the left and a margin of 25 on the right, 25 plus 25 is 50. So we do -50. That gives us a nice size. Height, same thing, almost. You'll note that we have self.height -51. Now, why in the world would we do that? Because if we say 50, look what shows up. A scroll bar. A scroll bar shows up in our HTML text control. Now, why is it this way? I have absolutely no idea, but I do know how you fix it. And that is by simply adding 1 pixel, or subtracting, if you will, 1 pixel from your height. So rather than -50, we're doing -51. And when you do that, everything works 99% of the time. And in a moment, I'll show you what that 1% is and how to solve it. So that is how we create this nice look. Now, if you're like, look, I am not going to remember all of this, mumbo jumbo here, we're going to solve that for you, and check this out. So this stylization is a style called glassmorphism. The guys over at Hype4 Academy kind of came up with this style and this name. And they have the glassmorphism generator. And you can just type that into Google, glassmorphism. In fact, here it is so you can see what that looks like. Look up the glassmorphism generator. And you can come in here, set the styling you want. If you want a color to your background, you can set that. And we're doing what, like a nice blue. So we'll come in here and make a nice blue out of it. And then you just copy your CSS and then come back over to your code. And keep in mind, you'll have to manually set this width here, but we'll come in here and take everything else and paste that in. Oh, the other thing that we'll need to add in back in is our margin. So you'll see that there's no margin. This thing is sucked up against the top left. So in this case, we'll take our box shadow, we'll take that back down to 20, and we'll say margin 25 pixels. Again, I always like to just add a little bit extra so we don't have any sharp edges on the blur. And there you go. And so that's the styling as we produced it straight out of the glassmorphism generator. And so that makes it, much easier to work with if you don't want to try to remember all of that code. All right. Let's talk about the next piece here, and that is these badges.
I missed you, so I thought I'd just jump back in here and remind you that, hey, if you want help adding this to your apps, right? Ryan does this for customers all the time. So just go hit us up over at www.powerapps901.com. Ryan can be your consultant. He can either mentor you one-on-one with this, or he can do an entire project for you that is just beautiful. So anyway, if you want consulting services, we can help you out.
Often when we're creating a badge, we will create it by creating a container, as you can see over here, con badge, and it is filled with red and has a border radius of 13. And then inside that container, we have a label that says severe thunderstorm warning. But what happens when you have a scenario where you need the size of the badge to be dynamic, to shift and change with your text? There's not an easy way to dynamically resize a label and its parent container based on the length of the text. You could find out, what's the average width of a character and count the number of characters and multiply it. I've done that before, but it's not always perfect because these are not fixed width fonts. And so what we can do is we can come over here and in the HTML text control achieve a very similar effect. Take a look at our HTML text. We use the span HTML tag with a background color. This is that red that you see. A text color, that's what this color tag is, with padding on the sides and the top so that the edges of the span aren't right up against the text. A border radius, now it says 50 pixels, but in order to get a fully rounded edge, all this radius has to be is at least half the height of the span itself. So for example, I could put 5,000 in here and it would still give me just a perfectly round, kind of, if you will, a half circle for the edge. But if I said, say 10 pixels, then it's not going to be rounded all the way. So I've just got 50 in here because that's more than enough. I'm not sure exactly how tall this is, but 50 works. Here's our font size and then our text. And here's the beauty of it. Let's say it was severe thunderstorm warning and lots of tornadoes. Look how that span automatically expands to the width that we need it to. And let's say that it was just something like a, wind watch. It automatically scales down to size. You'll note that we actually have two badges in here. I've used the HTML break tag to create a couple of line breaks here to create two badges. And again, same thing. We can just make this as long as we want. It'll automatically scale. And here's the beauty. Two badges, right? And I've used one control, one HTML text control to create this same thing by using pure PowerApps controls. I would have had to create 4 controls, 2 containers and 2 labels, one inside each container. And so instead of 4 controls to create this, I've only used 1 control. So again, it's not a one size fits all sort of solution, but there are absolutely times where this kind of a solution can be super, super helpful for creating badges. Now then, last thing we're going to take a look at, let's zoom back out here. I'm going to alt click to close my little window, and we're going to look at how to make a gradient background like this bar here. And what we've done is we've created a little overlay, and again, just to show you how the background blurred out so nicely, all we've got is an HTML text control for the background with the width. It takes the full width, the full height, -1 in order to keep from having a scroll bar, and a white background with 60% opacity and no margins because we have no shadow. We just want that blur background to fill the entire screen. We have our backdrop filter and our WebKit backdrop filter set to 4 pixels, and that's it. And it allows us to create this beautiful way to present our pop-up. And you say, why would we do this? Why would we take the little bit of extra time to create this way of creating a pop-up? If you completely blank out the screen with just a solid white background, it causes you to lose a little bit of context of where you are in the app. Did you go to a new screen? Are you still on the same screen? What happened? And so we don't like it to completely disappear. But if all we do is bring the pop-up over the top of it, now things are a little jumbled. There's just a lot going on the screen. And by using this tool to slightly blur and slightly cover the background behind, we keep the user in the overall experience, but draw them into what is most important in that moment, which is, in this case, this little pop-up with our forecast details, which of course we haven't put anything into it. I just want you to see how this gradient background works. So what we've got here is, let's get into it, is another container with an HTML text field control that fills the container, and inside of it, another div with a style property, and then this CSS, cascading style sheet language, that gives us a gradient. Again, you're starting to get used to this now, right? Our width is the self.width, the height is the self.height, -1 pixel, no scroll bars allowed. So this is how you create a gradient. Now again, you're like, Ryan, I'm not going to remember all of this. How in the world do I get a hold of this code? So there are dozens of CSS gradient generators on the internet. You can just Google gradient generator CSS and you will be able to get what you need. This is cssgradient.io. This is one that I really like. It's super simple, easy to use, and you can add, multiple colors to your gradient. You see the sample up top. Let's make this one, we'll add some red to it, and we'll take this and we'll add some yellow to it, and we want that one to be kind of semi-transparent. You get the idea. And once you've created the gradient the way you want, you can come in here, you can change whether you want it left to right, you can change whether it's up and down, or even at a slightly off angle. You can make it a radial gradient. See how that's a sunburst out from the center. You can create whatever kind of gradient you want, and then you come in here and you simply say, copy to clipboard. That grabs all the CSS for your gradient. Come over to your Power App and we're gonna paste this in. Remember, keep your width intact. This will not be provided for you. You just wanna get rid of this background stuff. We paste that in, and holy smokes, it ain't pretty, but it does demonstrate how a gradient works and how you can put it into your HTML text element. Now, let us go back, and I'm going to show you one last thing before we're done here today. You will notice when you do this on your own, you're going to notice when you do that height -1 thing and you apply this gradient, that at the very bottom of your container, there is a thin white line. Now, most people, are they going to know? Are they going to notice? Are they going to care? No. But in case you do care and you want to solve that, there's a reason for this. Because remember, in order to keep that scroll bar from showing up, we had to do height of the parent container -1. And you know where that -1 ends up? Right here. At the bottom of our HTML text, it is 1 pixel shorter than the parent container, which leaves this white line here. So it's really a very simple fix if you're using a nice straight linear gradient like this. Now, if your gradient's left to right, becomes a little more complex, but if you've got a nice up and down gradient, it's really simple. We just figure out what's the color at the bottom of this gradient and make that the background color of the parent container. So in our case, our top color is this RGBA 27931, and the bottom color is RGBA 9598141. So we're going to copy that, and then we're going to go to our parent container here. We're going to go to fill, and we're going to replace this default with RGBA. We do need to make that all caps. And this now will fill the entire container. Of course, it's underneath our HTML text control. It's going to fill it with the same color that is the bottom of our gradient. And now then, because we've done that, the 1 pixel that is showing now matches the color of the bottom of the gradient. And so you don't see that little white line, and all is well. So what have we learned? We have learned how to use a blur effect in the HTML text control to make our pop-ups pop. We've learned how to do a gradient of all sorts, linear and radial, left and right, up and down, using a CSS gradient generator like cssgradient.io. We have learned how to use the glassmorphism effect to give ourselves a little border, a little blur, a little shadow. We've learned how to create custom badges with the HTML text control, saving performance and memory by reducing the number of controls in our app and giving us the ability to create badges that are dynamically sized. Who would not want this? These are just, I mean, this is really just the tip of the iceberg in terms of what you can do with the HTML text control. There are certain CSS properties that are not honored by Canvas apps. And so rather than going into that list exhaustively, look for the stuff that you like, look at what's interesting and give it a try, see if it works. And you will, the sky will be the limit in terms of what you can create using this control. And it will add so much character and so much quality to your user interfaces.
Okay, so hopefully that was fun. Like, I learned a lot of stuff. I actually incorporated it in my training class 2 weeks ago because I thought it was pretty neat and I didn't know how to do any of that stuff. So just keep in mind, right, there's a lot of fun things you can do when you start to get more comfortable with HTML. I personally use, Copilot or ChatGPT all the time to help me write better HTML, get ideas for that. So lots of cool stuff. So other thing I want to ask you real quick is, what did you think of Ryan? Like, are you okay with Ryan coming on here from time to time and teaching this? Are there other UI, UX concepts you'd like Ryan to teach? Leave us comments below. We are always happy to put those into the mix because, let's face it, sometimes you get tired of me. It's okay. All right, that's enough with that. So what we're going to do is we're going to say thanks and have a great day.